I saw a glaring red lipstick stain on my husband's collar, a shade I've never worn. I didn't say a word. I just quietly swapped the anti-wrinkle cream he cherished every night with hair removal cream. And what happened the next morning made the entire company meeting room erupt in laughter and camera flashes. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please hit like and subscribe to my channel. And let me know in the comments where you're hearing my revenge story from. I want to know how far it's reached. In the silent kitchen, I sat motionless before the worn wooden table. The air was thick, like a gray fog creeping through every door crack, pressing heavily on my chest. On the wall, the old clock ticked steadily, its rhythm like an unrelenting indictment. It was once a wedding gift from my father, a man long gone, and tonight, each tick of the second hand felt like a reminder that something in my life was fracturing. Greg still wasn't home. Honestly, it had become so routine I wasn't even surprised anymore. At first, he'd explained it was work stress, difficult clients, or million-dollar projects demanding his full effort. I used to believe him. I wanted to believe him. But every belief has its limits, and I'd reached mine when I realized his excuses, repeated like a worn-out song. I touched the cold coffee cup from the afternoon, its bitterness lingering on my tongue, choking my throat. In the silence, memories flooded back, the early years of marriage, when Greg hung the blue curtains I loved, eagerly painted the walls to help me start my little spa in the garage. Back then, his eyes lit up as if I were his entire world. Yet now, all I saw in them was haste, avoidance, and something dark he'd never let me touch. The shirt he'd hastily stripped off, draped over the couch, bore a smudged red lipstick stain, not my color. I've never worn such a bold shade, ever. The scent clinging to the collar tightened my heart, a cloying, unfamiliar perfume, reminiscent of a department store cosmetics counter I'd passed by once. It didn't belong in this house, didn't belong to me. I knew I stood at a crossroads in our 15-year marriage. For months, I'd felt the growing distance, like a chasm widening between two shores. Dinners were now just the lonely clink of cutlery, conversations brief and devoid of warmth. And now, the evidence of betrayal was no longer vague. It was blatant on his collar, in the scent, in every deceitful gesture Greg thought I didn't notice. I could have screamed in his face, cried, smashed things, or shouted. But instead, I sat still. Silence enveloped me like armor. Silence to observe. Silence to calculate. Silence to nurture a new resolve. Greg thought I was weak, that I'd always endure, but he was wrong. I looked around the familiar kitchen, once a witness to warm family moments. Now it was a stage for deception. On the wall, the clock kept ticking patiently, each sound like a knife carving into my heart. I took a deep breath, and in that moment, a bold, dangerous, but powerful thought sparked. I would no longer sit here as a victim. I'd turn this silence into the start of a revenge plan. Greg would never forget. Greg came home near midnight, his polished leather shoes clacking harshly on the wooden floor. He didn't say a word, just tossed his keys on the shelf, hung his jacket on a chair, and poured himself a whiskey. I watched him from the kitchen, the dim yellow light casting shadows that made the wrinkles around his eyes, usually hidden by his beloved cream, more apparent. Instead of the usual exhaustion of a man returning late from work, his face held a strange excitement, as if he'd just left a party rather than a tense meeting. I didn't ask where he'd been or demand an explanation. I just quietly cleared the leftover dishes from the dinner he'd missed. My silence seemed to unsettle him. He cleared his throat and mumbled something about new partners from Houston and important investment opportunities. I nodded, expressionless, and that indifference made him falter. Greg was used to me listening attentively, asking questions, nurturing him, not this cold brick wall silence. The next day, while doing laundry, I found a crumpled piece of paper in Greg's trouser pocket. It was a receipt from an upscale Italian restaurant, the same one we'd gone to for our wedding anniversary nearly 10 years ago. A meal for two, a bottle of fine red wine. My heart stung, as if pierced by a sharp knife. I remembered the last time we dined out together. He barely looked up from his phone, while I sat across, picking at a cold salad. And now, he'd taken someone else to that same place, ordering the wine I used to love. I held the receipt, feeling its weight like evidence, then tucked it into the wooden box where I kept old keepsakes, not to cherish, but to collect every sign of betrayal, to one day build a wall of proof Greg couldn't break. In the weeks that followed, the pieces came together. A new tie I'd never seen, which he claimed was bought on sale. A faint lipstick smudge on his collar, which he hurriedly said was from a colleague accidentally brushing against him. An undeleted text, just a few words. "Last night was great. Can't wait to see you again." The sender was saved as Michael. But I knew Greg had no close friend named Michael. And that tone, it wasn't a man's. Each detail was like a stone dropped into a still lake, sending ripples that overlapped until the surface was no longer calm. I became a detective in my own home, searching for clues in Greg's daily habits. More new clothes, a heavier cologne scent, his hair trimmed neatly as if for a date rather than work. I stayed silent. Some close friends, hearing my vague complaints, advised, "Melissa, confront him directly, catch him in the act, don't let him disrespect you." But I shook my head. I knew Greg was clever enough to turn any situation around. If I made a scene, he'd deny it, blame my imagination, or worse, paint me as a paranoid, suspicious wife. I wouldn't fall into that trap. I needed patience. One afternoon, while cleaning the bathroom, my eyes fell on the fancy glass jar Greg treasured every night. His expensive anti-wrinkle cream, the secret to staying young, he boasted about. He applied it meticulously, like a religious ritual, admiring his smooth skin in the mirror, as if it were his greatest achievement. I stood there for a long time, staring at the jar, and a thought sparked. What if the thing he cherished most became the knife that stabbed him back? What if the thing he trusted absolutely turned into the cause of his public humiliation? That thought clung to me all evening, haunting me even as I tried to sleep. And in the heavy silence between us, on our now cold marital bed, I knew I'd found the spark to start a plan. Greg had no idea that every half-hearted hug, every red lipstick stain, every restaurant receipt was becoming a crack in his carefully crafted mask. And when that mask fell, I'd be there, calm, watching, and putting an end to it. That night, after Greg fell into a deep sleep, reeking of whiskey, I lay with my back to him, eyes wide open in the dark. His steady snoring rang out like a false refrain, and I found myself pulled back to earlier years, when just hearing his footsteps at the door made my heart race. Back then, we had little but love and dreams. I still remember the small garage behind the house, where Greg painted alongside me to turn it into my first spa. The walls were patchy, the light dim, but I glowed when my first client walked in. Greg stood behind the counter, smiling brightly, handing me a bottle of essential oil and saying, "We'll go even further." That was the first time I felt truly supported by a man, sharing my dreams. But time passed. Greg climbed the corporate ladder, while I stuck with my little spa. He spoke less about my work, sometimes tossing out mocking jests. "You keep massaging. I'll handle the big contracts." At first, I thought it was just carelessness, but his gaze shifted from pride to condescension. I tried to overlook it, believing every marriage had its dull phases. Greg's change was most evident when he became obsessed with aging. He'd stand at the mirror every night, examining faint wrinkles around his eyes and forehead. He bought anti-wrinkle creams more expensive than a week's profit from my spa. He spent hours reading about rejuvenation therapies and bragged to friends that his skin was tight as a 30-year-old's. I watched him primp and preen, becoming a stranger. He no longer shared what truly mattered, only cared about showing off his appearance. Meanwhile, I stayed busy with the spa. I knew clients came to me not just for beauty but for listening. I'd heard countless stories of broken marriages, women betrayed and deceived. Before, I'd nod sympathetically, thinking I was luckier. Now, I stood among them, another woman betrayed by her husband. I remember once casually asking, "If we grow old, will we still be together?" Greg smirked. "I'll never let myself age. Look at me. I'm like 30. I laughed along, but unease stirred within. He didn't say we, just I. I didn't understand then, but now I knew Greg never truly saw us in his future. He only saw himself, and the artificial youth he chased. In the dark, I turned to look at Greg's face, smooth from the cream he believed was a miracle. Ironically, that obsession gave me an idea. He saw his cream as a weapon against age. What if I turned it into the cause of his humiliation? The thought flickered faintly at first, then blazed. I knew one misstep could let Greg turn the tables, blame me, make me seem crazy. So, I had to calculate carefully, let him sink himself into the mud, and the perfect weapon was that jar of cream he cherished nightly. The next day, as he applied his cream at the mirror, I watched from afar. Greg scooped out small amounts, rubbing it evenly, patting his face with solemnity, as if performing a sacred rite. He smiled at his reflection while I stood there. My own smile withered. Irony flooded me. The man who promised to protect me now only cared for the flawless face in the mirror, leaving our marriage to crumble. I stepped back, heart pounding. The idea was clearer than ever. I wouldn't scream, fight, or let myself be pitied. I'd use Greg's obsessive habit to teach him a lesson, and when he walked into work with a face no longer his perfect canvas, he'd learn some wrinkles can be hidden, but some shames will mark him forever. In the quiet night, I closed my eyes, listening to the clocks ticking. But this time, each tick wasn't an accusation against me. It was a countdown to the day Greg would face the truth that everything he valued most could vanish overnight. The next morning, as Greg left early for a big client meeting, I was tidying the living room when I noticed his leather briefcase left under the table. I didn't mean to snoop, but as I picked it up to place on the shelf, a stack of papers fell out. It was a credit card statement. My eyes scanned familiar charges, groceries, gas, phone bills, then stopped at one, a jewelry set from Tiffany & Company, worth nearly a month's spa revenue. I knew it wasn't for me. I hadn't received any gift box. It felt like someone dumped ice water over me, cold and suffocating. That evening, when Greg returned, I noticed him avoiding my gaze. He changed quickly, then slumped onto the couch, feigning exhaustion. But as he removed his shirt, I saw another smudged lipstick stain on the collar. The same bold red. I didn't ask, just stared, until Greg, flustered, offered an explanation. A colleague hugged me goodbye, her lipstick smudged. He spoke fast, as if he barely believed himself. I nodded faintly, pretending to accept, but each word carved the truth deeper. Greg was living a double life. Mornings, he dressed impeccably, his expensive cologne announcing he was meeting someone important. Evenings, he came home late, pretending to complain about work, then crashed. His phone now had a new passcode. Sometimes, I heard message alerts in the night, the screen flashing, but he hid it like it held state secrets. Once, while folding laundry, I found a small folded note in Greg's trouser pocket. I opened it, a few scribbled lines in flowery handwriting, with a heart. Last night was amazing. Thanks for an unforgettable evening. May. My heart clenched. That mean again. He'd saved her number as Michael to fool me. But now it was clear. Maine was her. The irony. Her initial matched mine. Greg had used that coincidence to deceive me for months. I tucked the note into the wooden box with the jewelry receipt and restaurant bill. The box, once holding happy memory photos, now became a chest of betrayal evidence. Each time I closed it, I felt like sealing away my pain, to one day open it before Greg, leaving him no room to deny. But I didn't want to stop at collecting evidence. I wanted Greg to feel exposed to the world, not just face my anger behind closed doors. And then, watching him carefully handle his anti-wrinkle cream each night, eyes glued to the mirror, oblivious to everything else, I knew this was his fatal weakness. He could hide his phone, spin lies, but he'd never abandon that obsessive ritual. One afternoon, I stopped by the supermarket to buy essential oils for the spa. Passing the cosmetics aisle, I lingered at the hair removal cream display. Its texture was eerily similar to Greg's anti-wrinkle cream. A bold, dangerous thought sparked, making my hands tremble. If I swapped that cream, if he applied it before work, I didn't need to imagine much. The vision of his humiliation was vivid. Just then, a familiar voice called out, "Melissa, is that you? It's been a while." I turned to see Linda, a former spa client. We chatted briefly, then Linda casually mentioned seeing Greg dining with a young woman in a red dress at the restaurant we used to visit. She added, "I was going to say hi, but they seemed too close, so I didn't. I smiled, thanked her, but inside, it was like pouring oil on a fire. That night, watching Greg, I studied him closer. His shirt ironed, crisp tie knotted neatly, hair slicked back perfectly. He glanced at me briefly, then hurried to the bathroom, locking the door for a long time. I knew he was at the mirror, applying his cream with satisfaction. I heard the jar's cap click open, the soft pats on his cheeks, and imagined a day when those motions would lead him to ruin. When he emerged, I sat on the couch, eyes tracking his every move. Greg smirked. Big presentation tomorrow. Might be home late. I nodded, saying softly, "Don't worry, I understand." He was pleased, thinking I was still the obedient, clueless wife. But inside, I was certain the scattered clues had formed a complete picture. One final step, and I'd tear down the mask Greg had so carefully built. After that chance talk with Linda at the supermarket, my suspicions hardened into undeniable truth. Greg had another woman, young and bold, and he wasn't hiding it as well as I'd thought. I no longer wavered between maybe and impossible. Now the only question was, what would I do with this truth? The answer came as I stood before the gleaming cosmetics shelf that day. Rows of creams, serums, and lotions neatly aligned, but my eyes locked on the sleek tubes of hair removal cream, their white, opaque texture catching the light. I picked one up, read the instructions, and noted its texture, color, even faint scent, nearly identical to Greg's cherished anti-wrinkle cream. My heart raced. The thought was clear. I'd swap the jars. For days I studied in secret. I tested a bit of hair removal cream on my arm, watching the reaction, a slight sting, then soft hairs dissolved away. I pictured Greg's face, his prized possession, under that cream's care. His meticulously trimmed eyebrows would vanish without a trace. The thought was both chilling and satisfying. I observed Greg's routine closely. After showering, he'd dry his face, open his pricey cream jar, scoop out just enough, and rub it across his forehead, cheeks, and carefully around his eyes. He'd admire himself in the mirror, smiling faintly. Each gesture, each motion, repeated like a sacred ritual. He might skip dinner, forget to ask about me or the kids, but he never skipped his cream. That was his fatal flaw. I knew I couldn't rush. One slip, and Greg would grow suspicious. So I planned meticulously. Step 1, buy a new hair removal cream, in a jar, as close as possible to Greg's anti-wrinkle cream. I chose an unscented one to avoid detection. Then I gathered thin gloves, a clean cloth, and a small spoon for the transfer. I had to ensure no trace was left, no smudge on the lid, nothing to make him wary. In the days waiting for the right moment, I acted normal. I cleaned, cooked, made small talk when Greg deigned to speak. But inside, I was a calculating machine, timing every move, memorizing every habit. I knew Greg spent the longest in the bathroom around 11 p.m. I knew he left the cream jar on the counter, lid not fully tightened to avoid damaging the threads. I knew he'd sleep deeply after a whiskey, oblivious to the world. One evening, as Greg sprawled on the couch, phone glued to his hand, I passed by casually. A message flashed on his screen. "Meet me tomorrow. Don't forget the blue suit I like." I held my breath, pretending not to see. That blue suit, I'd given it to him for our anniversary. Now, he wore it for another woman. The irony fueled my resolve. My plan felt justified, necessary. That night, after Greg drank himself to sleep, I stepped into the bathroom. The air was cold, steam droplets clinging to the mirror. I opened the cabinet, seeing his familiar anti-wrinkle cream jar, glinting under the yellow light like a false idol. I put on gloves, set the hair removal cream beside it, and began. I opened Greg's jar, its faint scent rising. With the spoon, I carefully scooped out the cream, placing it in a nylon bag for disposal. Then, I slowly filled it with hair removal cream, smoothing the surface to avoid suspicion. Sweat beaded on my forehead. My heart pounded as if I'd committed a grave crime, but my hands stayed steady. I wiped the lid clean, screwed it back carefully, and placed the jar exactly as it was. After finishing, I stood silently staring at the jar once more. Small, seemingly harmless, but starting tomorrow, it would become a detonator. I removed the gloves, packed up all the tools, and hid them in the trash bag at the bottom of the bin. When I returned to bed, Greg was still snoring steadily, unaware that in just a few hours, his life would change in ways he never expected. Lying down beside him, I felt strange. No more bitter tears like before. Instead, there was an unusual calm, as if I had reclaimed control. I knew I couldn't take back the lost years, or make Greg love me again, but I could do one thing: make him remember me, remember my silence, through a humiliation he could never wash away. I closed my eyes, listening to the clock in the living room tick steadily. This time, it no longer felt like an indictment against me. Each tick was a countdown, bringing me closer to the moment Greg would face the truth. And I swore, when daylight flooded in, I'd be the only one knowing that the tragicomic drama about to unfold was directed by me. That night, the house sank into thick darkness, with only the bedside lamp casting a faint yellow glow from the hallway. I lay still on the bed, listening to Greg's steady breathing beside me. He'd downed 2 glasses of whiskey after dinner, his shoulders heavy, his snores ringing out like hammer strikes against the wall. I stared at the ceiling, heart racing, knowing this was the moment to act. If I missed it, I'd fall back into the cycle of doubt and stifled rage with no escape. I gently lifted the blanket, setting my feet on the cool wooden floor. Each step felt like treading on shards of glass, trembling and tense. I quietly left the room, closing the door, and moved toward the bathroom. My hand tightly clutched the prepared kit: thin gloves, tissues, a small spoon, and the newly bought jar of hair removal cream. As I nudged the bathroom door open, the hinge let out a faint creak, making me freeze. I glanced back, heart stopping for a few seconds, fearing Greg might wake. But no, his snores continued steadily from the bedroom, like a soundtrack to the crime I was about to commit. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The bathroom light was cold and bright, reflecting my image in the mirror: a woman with disheveled hair, sunken eyes, but a face lit with steely determination. I set the kit on the sink, opened the cabinet, and saw Greg's familiar anti-wrinkle cream jar. It stood neatly, gleaming under the light, like a sacred object he worshipped. I put on the gloves, opened the jar, and a faint scent wafted up. My hands trembled slightly, but stayed steady as I scooped out the cream with a spoon, placing it into a nylon bag. I worked slowly, precisely, like a surgeon where a single mistake could be fatal. When the jar was nearly empty, I opened the hair removal cream, spooning it in. The white, opaque cream was smooth, almost identical to the original. I leveled the surface, wiped the rim clean, and screwed the lid back on. In that moment, I heard a noise in the hallway. My heart leapt to my throat. I quickly turned off the light, held my breath, and pressed my back against the wall. Footsteps, but then silence. A moment later, I realized it was just the house, settling in the night, the wood creaking with temperature changes. I exhaled, cold sweat, dampening my neck. I turned the light back on, placed the swapped jar exactly as it was, aligning it precisely. Not a single detail could be off. Greg was meticulous with this cream. Any oddity might make him suspicious. I gathered the nylon bag with the old cream, sealed it tightly, and hid it in the large trash bag prepared in the kitchen. Then I removed the gloves, washed my hands with lemon soap, scrubbing until my skin was raw, as if trying to erase any trace of what I'd done. Looking in the mirror again, I saw a strange glint in my eyes. No more suppressed rage, no more victimhood, but absolute control. I had touched Greg's greatest weakness, and he was completely unaware. I returned to the bedroom, opening the door softly. Greg was still there, mouth agape, snoring heavily. I climbed into bed slowly, pulling the covers over me. In the darkness, I traced the outline of his face, the man who once promised to hold my hand for life, now sleeping soundly, believing his secrets were perfectly hidden. He had no idea that in a few hours, as he applied his miracle cream, he'd begin to destroy the image he worshipped. Lying there, I heard a different music, not the accusing ticks of the clock, but a countdown. Each heartbeat in my chest brought me closer to the moment Greg would step out, carrying a face he thought was perfect, but would become a laughingstock. I closed my eyes trying to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, images flashed. Greg at the mirror in the morning, Greg entering the meeting room, Greg trying to present as colleagues burst into laughter. I pictured every detail, so vivid I could almost hear the whispers and giggles. A powerful wave surged within me, not joy, not pain, but balance. For the first time in months, I felt in control. At dawn, I sat up, opened the window. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet grass from the garden. The sky was still dark, with only a faint streak of light at the horizon. I took a deep breath, telling myself, today Greg will walk into a trap he never saw coming. Returning to bed, Greg stirred, smacked his lips, and pulled the blanket. He had no idea that in a few hours, everything would change. I looked at his face one last time, no longer feeling pain, only cold calm. The plan was complete. The game had begun. And this time, I was the one moving the pieces. Morning light slipped through the curtain gaps, casting faint streaks on the wooden floor. I got up earlier than usual, heart heavy but eyes sharp from a sleepless night. Greg lay still, one arm across his chest, breathing evenly. I watched him for a long time, wondering how I once loved this man so deeply, believed he was my strongest pillar. Now, all I saw was a liar about to face the most memorable day of his life. Around 7, the alarm blared. Greg groggily stirred, stretched, and yawned. I left the room, pretending to be busy in the kitchen, but my ears caught every sound from the bathroom. The jar's lid clicked open with a familiar snap, and I could picture the scene, Greg at the mirror, pushing his hair back, scooping a dab of cream with his fingertip, rubbing it evenly across his face. I closed my eyes, heart pounding. This was the moment. I imagined the hair removal cream seeping into his skin, clinging to the eyebrows he so proudly maintained. Each pat, each circular rub, was self-care to him, but to me, it was a stab of revenge. The sound of running water. Greg whistled softly, a cheerful tune I hadn't heard from him in ages. He stepped out, hair slicked back, crisp navy shirt, silver gray tie perfectly matched. A smug smile played on his lips, as if the world was his to command. Big presentation today, he said, eyes gleaming with excitement. Don't wait up for dinner. I'll be late. I nodded, keeping my voice steady to hide the bitter smile. Focus on your work. Greg thought I was supportive, but I noticed the slight redness around his eyes, the skin on his forehead starting to look taut and irritated. He didn't notice, giving the mirror one last glance before grabbing his briefcase and leaving. When the door closed, I stood frozen in the living room, listening to the car engine fade. My body trembled, not from fear, but from a surge of adrenaline. It had begun. In a few hours, Greg would expose his humiliated face to the world. I sat at the kitchen table, brewing a hot tea, hands still slightly shaking. In my mind, I pictured the scene, a large meeting room, cold fluorescent lights, colleagues seated attentively, Greg striding in with his usual confidence, smiling brightly, voice booming. But minutes later, someone would notice his missing eyebrows. Then all eyes would turn to him, stifled laughs breaking free, phones raised, snapping photos, recording videos. And as Greg tried to regain composure, the red lipstick stain on his collar would be the exclamation point, an undeniable accusation. The thought made my lips twitch, not from pure joy, but from a sense of justice being restored. He thought I'd stay silent, forgive forever. But this morning, he'd learned that a woman's silence isn't weakness. It's a storm waiting to erupt. Around 10, I got a text from an old friend at Greg's company. Your husband's presenting to the board today. Big pressure. He says it's his shot at a promotion. I read it, smiling. A big impression indeed, but not the kind he wanted. I replied briefly, yeah, let's see how it goes. I went to my small spa, trying to work as usual. Clients came in. I massaged. I chatted, but my mind kept counting down. Each minute brought Greg closer to his downfall. I imagined the meeting room clock, its second hand moving slowly, while his face began to itch, skin tightening. He wouldn't understand what was happening, only that something was wrong. And when he stood before the crowd, with no eyebrows to frame his eyes, his face would become a joke. Near noon, I stepped onto the spa's balcony, taking a deep breath. The sky was clear, sunlight stretching across the street. I felt an odd peace. Though I hadn't seen it yet, I knew the script was unfolding as planned. Greg had walked confidently into his big day, carrying the tool of my revenge on his face. I returned inside, opening the wooden box holding the evidence, the restaurant receipt, the jewelry bill, the handwritten note. I touched each item, no longer feeling their sting. Now, they were just pieces on a chessboard I'd arranged, and Greg, who thought he was the player, was merely a pawn. Around 1, my phone buzzed. A text from the same friend. "Melissa, you won't believe what's happening. The whole company's going crazy over Greg. He showed up to the meeting with no eyebrows, and there's a lipstick stain on his shirt. Everyone's taking photos. It's all over the internal group chat." I read it, heart racing, but my lips curled into a sardonic smile. So the fateful morning had begun to sow the laughter Greg would never forget. The meeting room on the 17th floor glowed with fluorescent light. The long table cluttered with laptops, files, and steaming coffee cups. Senior managers sat upright, murmuring about the project Greg was set to present. Everyone expected an impressive pitch. Greg was known for his confidence and polished appearance. The door opened. Greg strode in with a radiant smile. Navy suit pristine, silver gray tie gleaming. He set his leather briefcase on the table, pulled out a chair, and started the projector. For the first moment, no one said anything, just a heavy silence. Then faint whispers from the back of the room. A young female colleague leaned over, whispering with wide eyes, "My God, he has no eyebrows." The tiny whisper spread like a virus. People looked closer. Sure enough, Greg's face was shiny, smooth, but oddly bare. The area above his eyes was red, unnaturally smooth. No lines framed his face, making his eyes look bewildered and lost. Greg hadn't noticed. He opened his slides, launching into next quarter's market expansion strategy, voice booming confidently. But instead of listening, colleagues exchanged glances, stifling laughs. A man in the corner covered his mouth, shoulders shaking. A woman pretended to take notes, but snapped a photo under the table. Then the first laugh broke, soft but loud enough for the room to turn. Greg paused, frowning, thinking someone was laughing at his slide. He cleared his throat, continued, but seconds later, laughter erupted from multiple directions. Uncontainable. Someone blurted out, "Oh God, Greg, where are your eyebrows?" Greg froze, heart skipping. He touched his face, swiping across his forehead, feeling only smooth skin. Panic flashed in his eyes. Just a slight allergy," he stammered, trying to stay composed. But the excuse was too weak when the truth was plain for all to see. Just then, a gasp came from the back row. "Wait." His shirt, all eyes turned. On Greg's crisp white collar, a vivid red lipstick stain stood out, smudged along the edge like blood. It glared under the lights, unmistakable. The room exploded. Laughter roared, mixed with chatter. "Who goes to a client meeting like this? What's with that lipstick? No eyebrows, plus lipstick. Unbelievable." Someone couldn't resist, openly snapping a photo, and like dominoes, more phones lit up. Within minutes, images of Greg's bare face and lipstick-stained collar flooded the company's internal group chat. Greg tried to push through his presentation. He spoke of revenue, charts, market potential, but no one listened. They stared at his bare eyes, his strained smile, and the lipstick-stained screaming betrayal. His voice trembled, sweat poured, slides skipped erratically from his fumbling hands. A stern senior manager, rarely expressive, shook his head. "This level of unprofessionalism is unacceptable." The words were a death blow. Greg felt his legs shake, his body nearly collapsing. He knew he'd lost not just respect, but the status he'd worked so hard to build. In the corner, younger staff giggled, editing Greg's photos into memes shared among themselves. One image, captioned, "When you forget to draw your eyebrows, but remember to kiss someone not your wife," passed around. The laughter echoed through the room, merciless and unstoppable. Greg wanted to flee, but knew leaving would make him more of a joke. So he gritted his teeth, finishing the rest, voice hoarse, eyes down, avoiding every gaze. But the humiliation was clear. When he ended, only a few polite claps followed, drowned by looks of disdain or mockery. As he left the meeting room, his phone buzzed incessantly. The group chat overflowed with his images, paired with biting comments. Greg's new office fashion, trend alert, browless men. A close colleague texted privately, "Greg, you can't delete these. The whole company's seen them." Greg rushed to the bathroom, staring into the mirror. His face was red, eyebrows completely gone, skin smooth and burning. He let out a silent scream, punching the sink, but the laughter from the hallway still echoed, cruel and bitter. Meanwhile, at the spa, Melissa's phone kept buzzing. Her old friend sent the first photos. Greg in the meeting room, face bare, collar stained, eyes panicked. Melissa stared, heart pounding, then leaned back in her chair. A sardonic smile crept across her lips. It had unfolded exactly as she'd foreseen. Greg had exposed himself to the world, and she didn't need to lift another finger. Within minutes, the images leaked beyond the company, hitting social media. An anonymous account posted, "My boss showed up to a meeting like this," with close-up shots. Shares skyrocketed. Greg, once a successful man, became an internet laughingstock. At the office, the laughter didn't stop. Greg tried to leave, but each step felt heavy, dragging his career down with him. And he knew, from this moment, there was no going back. Greg stumbled out of the meeting room, walking like a defeated boxer. The usually noisy office hallway was thick with whispers. Employees gathered in small groups, pretending to discuss work, but unable to hide their amusement. Phones were raised, zooming in on his bare face and the glaring lipstick stain. Greg tried to hold his head high, clinging to his last shred of dignity, but his polished shoes felt like lead on the floor. He hurried toward the elevator, desperate to escape the prying eyes. But when the doors opened, a woman was already inside. Allison. No, to Greg, she was Kelly, the young assistant he'd been secretly seeing. Kelly wore a tight red dress, her wavy hair cascading over her shoulders. Her lips, painted in the same bold red, matched the stain on his collar with shameless precision. Seeing Greg, she froze, eyes wide with shock. "My God, Greg, your face. Where are your eyebrows?" Her voice trembled, half panicked, half amused. Greg quickly covered his forehead, hissing, "Shh, not here." But it was too late. A group of passing employees overheard, bursting into laughter. One guy muttered, "Oh, so that's whose lipstick is on his shirt." The comment was a spark to dry tinder. What was once just whispers flared into undeniable truth. Kelly fumbled into the elevator, trying to avoid everyone's stares. Greg followed, but even in the enclosed space, he couldn't escape the humiliation. Kelly pulled out a tissue, attempting to wipe the lipstick off his collar, but the gesture only made things clearer. The security camera captured it, and within minutes, the clip Greg and his mistress in the elevator spread across the company's internal network. At the spa, Melissa got a text from her old friend. "You won't believe this. They saw Greg with his new assistant, Kelly. She's the source of that lipstick." The video's spreading. Attached was a short clip. Melissa opened it, seeing Greg in the elevator, hand over his face, while Kelly frantically wiped his shirt. Her heart sank, but her lips curled into a cold smile. The evidence was clearer than ever. In the office, the atmosphere was electric with gossip. Employees paired Greg's browless photo with Kelly's, adding captions, "The new power couple, boss and red lipstick assistant." Laughter echoed across departments, even the sternest staff unable to hold it in. Greg, meanwhile, holed up in his office, door locked. But the phone notifications pounded relentlessly, emails from superiors, HR messages, and anonymous jabs. He tried calling Kelly, but she didn't answer. Minutes later, she sent a curt text. "I can't see you right now. Too messy. I need to think." For the first time in years, Greg felt the ground collapse beneath him. He'd been confident his affair was hidden, that Kelly would always admire his success. But in one morning, it all crumbled: his reputation, his image, and even his mistress. Melissa sat in the spa, her phone buzzing incessantly. Clients came in, and she greeted them with a smile, but in her apron pocket, new messages kept arriving. She saved every photo, every video, meticulously, like an accountant keeping records. This wasn't just office gossip. It was proof of infidelity, proof of betrayal, proof of public humiliation. That afternoon, Kelly vanished from the office. Rumor had it, she took sudden leave, dodging every stare. Some said she sobbed in the bathroom, claiming she was just a victim, but no one bought it. They whispered. She knew exactly what she was doing, and the lipstick on Greg's shirt is living proof. Greg was left alone, like a wounded animal, in an iron cage. He knew the news would reach the board, would reach his wife, if it hadn't already. And indeed, Melissa had seen it all. That evening, when Greg dragged himself home, Melissa was already at the kitchen table. The yellow light cast a glow, her face eerily calm. Greg tossed his briefcase onto a chair, hesitating. "Melissa, today I had some trouble at work." She said nothing, just silently slid her phone toward him, the screen lighting up with the elevator video. Greg looked, his face going pale. "Where did you get this?" he stammered. Melissa tilted her head, her voice low. "Doesn't matter. What matters is the whole company saw it." No shouting, no tears, just a silence sharp as a blade. Greg reached to touch her, but Melissa pulled back, her cold gaze silencing him. That night, Greg drained a bottle of whiskey, sitting silently on the sofa. Melissa walked to the bedroom, locked the door, and left him alone with his shame. She knew the game had only just begun, and Greg hadn't yet grasped the depth of the trap he'd fallen into. The house sank into darkness as the clock struck 10. Greg slumped on the sofa, the whiskey bottle half empty, eyes red and breath reeking of alcohol. He looked like a defeated man, hands trembling with no strength left. I stood at the doorway, watching the man who once prided himself as the pillar, now shriveled like a ghost. "Melissa," he called hoarsely, eyes pleading, "you have to believe me. Everything you saw was a misunderstanding, just a cruel prank by jealous colleagues. They want to bring me down." I didn't reply. I walked over, placing the phone on the table before him. The screen lit up with saved images. Greg without eyebrows, Greg in the elevator with Kelly, Greg in the meeting room with the glaring red lipstick stain. I scrolled slowly through each one, letting the light reflect on his ashen face. Greg bowed his head, breathing heavily. "Where did you get these?" he asked, voice breaking. "They're everywhere," I replied coldly. "Your company, the internal network, even social media. The whole world's seen them, Greg, and so have I." He clutched his head, hissing, "Damn it, damn it." Then he looked up, grabbing my hand like a lifeline. "Melissa, listen, I just got caught up. Kelly, she pursued me. I was weak, but I never meant to leave you, never meant to break our family." I pulled my hand back, slow but firm. My eyes were ice cold. "You broke it already, Greg. Not today, but months ago. The lipstick on your shirt, the restaurant receipt, the Tiffany jewelry. You think I didn't know?" Greg's jaw dropped, stunned that I'd quietly collected every detail. He collapsed back, face ashen. I was wrong. Give me a chance. We can move somewhere else. Start over." "I swear I'll cut her off. Melissa, I love you." I let out a short, sharp laugh. Love. A man who loves his wife doesn't turn their anniversary into a date with his mistress, doesn't wear the suit his wife gave him to meet another woman, and definitely doesn't let the whole company see him humiliated like today. Greg shook his head frantically, tears welling up. I'd never seen him cry. This man who once stood confidently before dozens, who berated me over a small business failure, now sobbed like a child. But to me, it wasn't pitiful. It was a deserved collapse. "Melissa, I'm begging you." He dropped to his knees, voice choking. "Keep this between us. I've lost enough face at work. If this goes to court, I'll lose everything. Please, for our son." I looked down, seeing his hands clasped, trembling. A pang of bitterness flashed through me, but I crushed it. "No, Greg, you made your choice. Now you face the consequences." I turned, walked to the bedroom, leaving him kneeling in the dark. The door closed behind me, but his sobs echoed. I sat at the vanity, opened the drawer, and pulled out a brown envelope. Inside were all the things I'd carefully kept: the restaurant receipt, the Tiffany bill, the handwritten note with M, and now the photos and videos from the company. I arranged them neatly, clipping them into a thick file. Tomorrow, I'd call the lawyer. I wouldn't just be the betrayed wife, I'd be the woman standing in court, presenting undeniable evidence, reclaiming what was mine: custody of our son, a fair settlement, and above all, justice. As I closed the file, a strange feeling washed over me, not triumph, not pain, but clarity. I'd crossed the line of hesitation. From now on, it was just procedure. Greg could cry, beg, even kneel, but it was too late. In the living room, I heard the whiskey bottle crash to the floor, shattering. Greg shouted in despair, then fell silent. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. In my mind, the clock's ticking resumed. But this time, it wasn't an accusation against me. It was like a gavel in a courtroom, preparing to deliver an unappealable verdict. The next morning, sunlight pierced the curtains, but the house still reeked of last night's whiskey. Greg lay sprawled on the sofa, shirt crumpled, mouth agape, his browless face making him look like a weary clown after a failed show. I stepped past, saying nothing. I paused briefly, looking down at the man I once called husband, then quietly grabbed the brown file and left. The lawyer's office was downtown, on the 11th floor of a gleaming glass building. As I entered, the smell of roasted coffee hit me, keyboards clacking in the background. My lawyer, Miss Harris, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with thin glasses, was already at her desk. She shook my hand, her smile brief but firm. "Melissa, I've seen the news. I think it's time we act." I placed the file on the table, opening it. Each piece of evidence was neatly arranged: the Tiffany receipt, the Italian restaurant bill, the handwritten note with a heart and EM, the photos of Greg in the meeting room with the lipstick stain, the elevator video with Kelly. Each item was a hammer blow, and together they painted a stark picture of betrayal. Miss Harris examined each piece, her eyes gleaming. "Excellent," she nodded slightly. "This is a perfect case, not just infidelity, but public humiliation directly impacting your dignity and mental health. We can absolutely demand full custody and a substantial settlement." I sat upright, voice calm but firm. "I don't want to drag this out. I want him to sign. I want it over, as fast as possible." The lawyer nodded, stacking the documents. "We'll send a mediation notice this week. I'm confident Greg has no way out. He'll have to accept your terms." That afternoon, when I returned home, Greg was still sprawled, eyes sunken, face dazed. He looked up, voice hoarse. "Where were you?" "With the lawyer," I replied curtly, placing the file on the table like a declaration. "Greg, this isn't just between us anymore. This will be a court case." He lurched up, stumbling toward me, grabbing for the file, but I'd anticipated it, holding it tight. "Don't be foolish," I said coldly. "You can tear this up, but I have copies. Your photos and videos are everywhere, Greg. You can't erase them." Greg staggered back, hands falling limp, eyes wild. "Melissa, please, for our son, don't do this. I'll lose everything. My job, my reputation. You've already lost them." I cut in. "The only thing left is the divorce papers, and you'll sign them." In that moment, I saw Greg tremble like a cornered animal with no escape. The man who once strutted in pristine suits with absolute confidence now looked like a trapped beast. That evening, a large envelope arrived, stamped with a bold red seal, the official mediation notice. Greg opened it, hands shaking. He read each line, then dropped it on the table, face crumpled. "No, this can't be." I sat across, calmly sipping tea. "It can, and it's happening." Greg slammed his hand on the table, eyes blazing. "I won't let you ruin my life." I looked straight at him, eyes like steel. "I didn't, Greg. You ruined it yourself. I just brought the truth to light." He stood frozen for a long moment, then collapsed into the chair, shoulders slumped. All his strength, all his arrogance, was now an empty shell. The legal net had closed around him, and he knew the more he struggled, the tighter it would bind. That night, as I closed the bedroom door, leaving Greg alone in the dark, I heard him muttering to himself, "I've lost everything, everything." His sobs mingled with the ticking of the living room clock. But this time, I felt no pain. I felt justice. The mediation day dawned with a gray sky, as if set to mirror Greg's mood. The family courthouse sat on a busy street, but his steps were heavy as lead. I walked ahead, posture straight, in a simple black dress that radiated resolve, clutching the file. Greg trailed behind, suit wrinkled, eyes sunken, his browless face, drawing stares from passers-by. I caught whispers from a group. That's him, Melissa's husband, the guy from the internet, the other day. Greg bowed his head, hands clenched, while I strode past, unfazed. In the mediation room, the air was stiflingly formal. My lawyer, Miss Harris, sat across from Greg's attorney. On the table, a thick stack of documents, photos, videos, receipts, ready to crush any denial. The judge spoke, voice firm. We are here to address the divorce between Miss Melissa Roberts and Mr. Gregory Roberts. Both parties have agreed to mediation, and all evidence has been provided. Greg looked up, starting to speak. Your Honor, this is just a misunderstanding. But my lawyer cut in, sliding the photos forward. Images of Greg in the meeting room, browless, with the lipstick stain, and the elevator video with Kelly played on the screen. The room fell silent, only Greg's racing heartbeat audible. The judge tapped the gavel. Mr. Roberts, these images and documents clearly show infidelity and dishonesty. Do you have anything to say? Greg bowed his head, hands trembling. I made a mistake, Miss. Harris looked at him, voice sharp as a blade. A mistake my client endured for months, in humiliation and betrayal. Miss Melissa now requests full custody and a fair settlement to continue her business. Greg looked up, eyes panicked. Melissa, please, we can negotiate. I'll change, I swear. I cut him off, voice cold. Too late, Greg. I don't need promises. I need justice. The judge reviewed for a long moment, then nodded. Based on the evidence, and both parties' agreement, the court rules, Miss Melissa Roberts is granted full custody. Mr. Gregory Roberts will pay a marital settlement and monthly financial support as agreed. The gavel's echo resounded. To me, it wasn't just a legal decision, but the toll of a bell closing 15 years of marriage. Greg slumped in his chair, face bloodless. His hand shook as he signed the divorce papers. After signing, he looked up, voice hoarse. Melissa, please, at least don't let Daniel know everything. I don't want to lose my son. I looked at him long, my gaze no longer angry, just cold detachment. Daniel will know the truth in his own way. I have nothing left to hide for you. Greg fell silent, tears pooling in his eyes, but not falling. The man once proud in pristine suits and confident gazes now sat abandoned, stripped of power and dignity. I stood, clutching the file, and walked out of the mediation room. Light from the hallway flooded in, illuminating my face, brighter and clearer than ever. I heard the chair creak behind me. Greg had buried his face in his hands. Stepping out of the courthouse, I took a deep breath. Not Greg's deceitful cologne, not the stench of whiskey, but the air of freedom. I had won, not with screams or tears, but with patience and cold resolve. And in that moment, I knew a new chapter had begun. Greg might forever be haunted by that humiliating meeting, his browless face, and the red lipstick stain. But I walked forward, head high, with custody of my son, and a fresh start. In the days after the mediation, the house felt vast and strangely quiet. Greg moved out, taking a few suitcases, leaving behind invisible cracks, clinging to every wall. I walked through the living room, past the sofa where he'd sobbed, past the liquor cabinet, with its half-empty bottles, and gave a faint smile. I once thought losing him would mean losing everything, but now, I realized I hadn't lost. I'd reclaimed peace, reclaimed the sigh of relief stolen from me for years. The divorce decree was tucked safely in my desk drawer. Each time I saw the red seal, I felt no bitterness, but saw it as a birth certificate for my new life. Daniel, my son, and I could start anew, free from lies and red lipstick stains on the collar of a man who should have been a role model. I used part of the settlement to lease a small shop downtown. A new sign went up, Melissa's Glow Spa. I painted the walls cream, laid new carpets, placed lavender pots in the corners. The scent of essential oils filled the space, fresh and gentle, unlike the heavy cologne that once lingered in the old house. On opening day, I expected just a few friends to show up, but to my surprise, neighbors, Old clients, even strangers came. They whispered among themselves, eyes full of admiration. An older woman took my hand, murmuring, "We read your story. You're so strong. You deserve this." I smiled, replying, "I'm not strong. I just had no other choice." But inside, I knew I'd changed. I was no longer the woman sitting silently in the kitchen, listening to the accusing ticks of the clock. I was the one rewriting the rhythm of my life. The new spa quickly became more than a beauty parlor. It was a place for sharing. Clients whispered their stories. A husband who left, a cheating lover, a deceitful marriage. I listened, massaged, applied face masks, and with each motion, I sent a message. We can be hurt, but we can still shine, still be reborn. Daniel moved in with me after everything came to light. My son was quiet, but his deep eyes reflected a pain I couldn't erase. One evening, over a simple dinner, rice, grilled fish, salad, he hesitated. "Mom, I'm sorry you had to go through all this." I placed a hand on his shoulder, voice firm. "No, Daniel, it's not your fault. Your father was wrong. Our job is to live better from now on." He nodded, eyes misty but lit with a spark of resolve. Late nights at the spa, after closing and turning off the lights, with the scent of essential oils lingering, I'd sit at the reception desk, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Greg, browless, with a lipstick stain, eyes panicked. I didn't look to gloat, but to remind myself, this was the price of betrayal and the power of patient silence. One day, a young woman came into the spa, looking weary. As I tended to her, she broke down, saying her husband was cheating with his assistant. I quietly handed her a tissue, whispering, "I understand. I've been there. But trust me, you'll find a way to stand up, and one day, you'll smile when you tell your story." She looked up, eyes red but glinting with hope. I realized my wounds had become strength for others. The spa wasn't just a job. It was a place to turn pain into lessons, tears into empathy. In quiet nights, with Daniel asleep, I sat alone in the spa's living room, looking at the large mirror reflecting the woman before me. I no longer saw the betrayed wife, the marital failure. I saw a resilient woman who'd walked through a storm and still stood tall. My new beginning wasn't dazzling like a spotlight, but simple, like morning light, filtering through the spa's glass. Yet that simplicity brought the peace I'd long craved. And I knew from now on, any wrinkle on my face was no longer frightening. Some scars never fade, but they can become proof of the strength I'd found. As my spa grew busier and Daniel adjusted to our new rhythm, I heard scattered news about Greg through neighbors or snippets of company gossip. All of it painted a bleak, gray picture. After the humiliating meeting room scandal, the board no longer trusted him. A major project was reassigned, and weeks later, Greg was demoted. Once a man who commanded conference rooms with polished charm, he now sat in a small office corner, avoiding colleagues' eyes. Kelly, the assistant who left red lipstick on his collar, vanished completely. They said she quit and moved to another city. Not a single message left behind. Greg was left alone, exposed and disgraced. Colleagues who once clinked glasses with him now looked at him with pity or disdain. One late afternoon, as I locked up the spa, I was startled to see Greg across the street. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt, eyebrows only half regrown, leaving bare patches that made his eyes look even more haggard. He glanced over, eyes glistening under the streetlights, then hurried across. "Melissa." His voice was hoarse, trembling. "I'm sorry, I've lost everything. My job, my dignity, even Kelly left. All I have is you and Daniel. Please, give me a chance to come back." I stood still, clutching my purse tightly. For a moment, part of me recalled the man who held my hand in the garage, painting walls for our first spa. But that image was quickly erased by lipstick stains, restaurant receipts, and his browless face amid mocking laughter. I shook my head, voice firm. "No, Greg, some things can grow back, but trust can't." He staggered, as if my words landed another blow to his chest. "Melissa, I'm begging you for our son, for our family." I cut him off, eyes icy. "Our family ended when you chose to betray it. I have nothing left to give you. Go." Greg stood frozen for a few seconds, then turned and walked away, his figure slumping, blending into the night like a directionless drifter. I watched, my heart steady. I felt only certainty that I'd been right to end it all. In the days that followed, news of Greg trickled in like fragments. He neglected work, often drunk in bars. People saw him sitting alone, bottles emptying, eyes vacant. Some old friends reached out, but he brushed them off, refusing advice. Gradually, no one wanted to deal with him anymore. Meanwhile, Daniel and I lived rare, peaceful days. Simple dinners, soft laughter, no more tension hanging over the ceiling. Sometimes, I thought of Greg, but not with pain, only as a reminder. His wounds were the inevitable result of his wrong choices. One evening, as Daniel and I walked through the park, we saw Greg again, sitting on a bench, face down, a beer bottle in hand. Daniel froze, but then gripped my hand, whispering, "Mom, let's keep going." I nodded. We walked past, leaving Greg in the dark, a broken figure under dim streetlights. I knew Greg's wounds would never heal. Not because of his missing eyebrows, not because Kelly left, but because he'd destroyed what mattered most: trust and respect. No cream in the world could erase that. One early autumn morning, I opened the spa, breathing in the scent of lavender and vanilla lingering in the air. Gentle sunlight spread across the polished wooden floor, reflecting off neatly arranged essential oil bottles on the shelf. The doorbell chimed as the first client entered, smiling, eyes sparkling with anticipation for a moment of care and peace. I greeted them with a soft smile, but inside, a deeper feeling swelled. I'd walked through hell and returned, more whole than ever. Daniel helped me clean the counter, checking the appointment book. My son was quieter now, but in his every gesture, I saw strength returning. He placed a stack of papers on the table, smiling. "Mom, next week's bookings are packed." I nodded, filled with pride. Our family, though missing one, had gained honesty and peace in return. Occasionally, I heard about Greg. People saw him wandering near cheap bars, face gaunt, eyes empty. His name no longer appeared on big projects. Kelly vanished, as if she'd never existed. Greg became a faint shadow in the company's memory, a joke that spread briefly before being replaced by new gossip. His wound wasn't his browless face, but a collapse he couldn't recover from. I didn't find joy in his downfall, but each time I remembered, I felt balance. He chose the path of betrayal, and that path led him to the abyss. I didn't need to seek more revenge. The world had done that for me. One late afternoon, the spa bustling, I took a moment to rest. A group of women in the waiting area chatted lively. One whispered, "Have you heard about Melissa's ex-husband? So pathetic." Another scoffed, "Pathetic? More like he deserved it." Only Melissa had the strength to turn betrayal into victory. I overheard but only smiled, staying silent. I didn't need to affirm. They saw, the neighborhood saw. My story had become a cautionary tale, proof that sometimes silence and patience are the strongest weapons. That night, after closing the spa, I sat alone in the room. The soft yellow light glowed on the large mirror, reflecting my face. No more tears, no more suppressed rage, just a sardonic smile, tinged with bitterness, but full of pride. I recalled it all: the ticking clock in the silent kitchen, the red lipstick on Greg's collar, the strange perfume, the nights I planned in the dark, then his browless face in the meeting room, the company's laughter, and finally, him kneeling, begging in despair. It was all closed now, like a book I'd just shut. I whispered to myself, as if to the world, "Some wrinkles are hard to erase, but some eyebrows vanish overnight." The words echoed in the empty room, making me laugh. The laugh wasn't loud, but spread, light and free, like an exclamation point for the journey. Tomorrow, I'd open the spa, greet clients, work with Daniel. I'd live a new life, not perfect, but true, free of deceit. And each time I looked in the mirror, I'd no longer see the betrayed wife, but a woman who'd learned to turn pain into strength. And so, the story ended with that smile, the final smile. If you found this story compelling, please like and subscribe to my channel to catch more intricate revenge tales. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next video with even more dramatic stories.